Ambika Satkunanathan. She's a human rights lawyer and the former commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. It's a pleasure speaking to you once again. Now, for a while, last time I spoke to you, you told me that none of the candidates were fit to be the next president of Sri Lanka, given their ties to Rajapaksa. So regardless of today's outcome in Parliament, the people of Sri Lanka aren't going to be content. What needs to happen moving forward?
Well, I think what we have seen just now is that the vote being counted, and I saw on the live feed that Harin Fernando, who was overseeing the interest, who was seated there for the counting and representing Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, several times gave a thumbs up sign towards the side where Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe was seated, and therefore perhaps that means that he has won. But what needs to be done is that whoever is elected and sets up a government must look at this as an interim measure and as a short-term measure, because the fact is the people have lost faith in all 225 members. They're trying to choose the least worst option right now. So what we need is a quick election. So within 6 months to go for general elections is what we need. So whoever comes to power must treat this as an interim phase, complete negotiations with the IMF, focus on the short-term economic, what needs to be done, decisions made to move towards economic recovery while planning for elections. That is what we need.
Talk to me about the IMF and how important it is for the next president, whoever it may be, to strike a deal with the IMF for the benefit of the country.
Experts advised this, the previous president to go to, and the government to go to the IMF much sooner, a year before we hit crisis point, but they refused to do so. So the IMF bailout is, as we know, that is something that is very important to Sri Lanka. It is not always the best option, because when you go for IMF bailouts, it also turns out that you might have to cut spending, and that might adversely impact things like health and education. You might have to cut down subsidies, and that hits the poorest sections of, let's say, the agricultural sector or the fisheries sector. But regardless of all that, it appears that is the only option we have. So it is important to complete those negotiations. And for that, we do need political stability. And when we go for the IMF bailout, we need to ensure that the hardest hit, the poorest, the people who have been pushed into poverty, the vulnerable, that their needs are taken care of, that we do not cut spending on health and education, that we take care of the vulnerable, and social protection mechanisms are put in place.
Do you think following this election that the country will reach some sort of political stability?
Well, it depends on who is elected, because if Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe is elected, as your correspondent rightly said, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe is the system, and Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe is viewed as a proxy of the Rajapaksas, someone who protected them during the previous government, the good governance government, when Mr. Wickremesinghe himself was prime minister. And he is someone who is viewed as that he will protect the Rajapaksas even going forward, and will not put the interest of the country first. So stability at the end of the day, it lies with the 225 members in Parliament. So we shall soon see. I think maybe they're announcing it as we speak. We will see what the decision is and how it unfolds.
Right, and we'll bring that decision to our viewers as soon as it's announced there in Parliament. Human rights lawyer Ambika Satkunanathan, thank you so much for joining us here on TRT World. It's always a pleasure speaking to you.